Getting diagnosed with any disease is never fun, but understanding why you got it is going to help you unravel it. So there are only two reasons why you actually get sick. These are going to be toxicities and deficiencies. Now, these are two really large umbrella terms that we're just sort of scratching the surface, and we will dive into this more in this episode. But if you want to understand the reasons you're sick, you have to understand that there are certain toxicities that get into your body that your body's reacting against, and certain deficiencies in nutrients or a deficiency in ability to actually defend yourself or clean these things out of your system. And so on this episode, we're going to be talking about three of the most common toxicities that I see in the 300 plus cases we've now helped reverse of Crohn's and colitis. And we're going to be taking you through what they are, what they look like, how to identify them in your body using what we call symptomatology. So learning to use your symptoms to pinpoint the root cause. And of course, I'm going to walk you through some basic steps on how to begin removing them. But remember, above all else, safety is key. Please keep in mind these are for information and educational purposes only, and this is not intended to substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Contrary to what your doctors told you, Crohn's and colitis are reversible. Now, I've helped hundreds of people reverse their bowel disease, and I'm here to help you do it too, because inflammation always has a root cause. We just have to find it. This is the Reversing Crohn's and Colitis Naturally podcast. Now, I do these live trainings in my Facebook group every single week and put the audios here for you to listen to. If you want to watch the video versions of these episodes, just click the link in the show notes to get access to our Facebook group and YouTube channel. And for weekly updates, information, tips, and tricks, you can sign up for our email list by clicking the link in the show notes below. What if you could know what's causing your IBD based on your symptoms? Now, by the time you finish this, you're going to know what your symptoms are actually pointing to for your root causes and what will be causing your IBD, and of course, what steps you can take to get rid of your symptoms. My name is Josh Deck. I'm an IBD specialist, medical lecturer, and physician's consultant for Crohn's, colitis, and severe IBS. Now, my team and I have helped hundreds of people now reverse their IBD because we always start with the root causes. We can help you do it too. And today I'm showing you how to identify your root causes of your IBD by looking at your symptoms. Now, you might be thinking, what symptoms do I have? Because all IBD presents the same, but your symptoms inside your gut and outside tell a big story. It looks like Bruce is coming to join us here. That's just the way it's going to be. Okay. So here's what we need to know. You only get sick for two reasons ever. That's it. Toxicities and deficiencies. So I'm going to show you today how to identify those in your body based on your symptoms so you can figure out what toxicities or deficiencies are creating your gut issues. All right, so here's the deal. There are contributors, things that will fill your glass, so to speak. You guys hear me often use this analogy where if your body's like a glass of water, and as it fills up, you develop more symptoms until it overflows, and then you have disease. Now, what we have is many things that fill your glass. If you say, well, stress is my trigger. Stress didn't fill your glass. Something else did. The stress was what made that bubble over. And so based on your symptoms, we can identify some of these other causes and what's truly filling your glass, not just bubbling it over. So here's what we want to look at. There are big contributors we see: stress, obviously. There are some super toxins, we call them. So things like mold, heavy metals, hidden infections. These are things that are in the body we don't know. A great example of this would be things like a root canal housing microbes or parasites, which is getting into your system and creating immune reactions and causing problems. We see organic pollutants and pesticides, especially things like glyphosate, really gnarly and directly correlated to the gut disease epidemic. Of course, things like EMFs, especially if you're sensitive. So your Wi-Fi's and cell phone towers. I do have a podcast episode on that. And of course, endocrine disruptors. These are notches. These are things that begin filling up your cup. These are super toxins. Now you go, well, it's just Wi-Fi. What's the big deal? It's not, unless you have a cup full and the Wi-Fi is the thing that makes it overflow. I know I sound crazy. I know I sound like Chucky from Better Call Saul, but the idea here is that these are contributors. But our focus today is on what's driving your IBD, and I'm going to go over the three most common causes we see across the 300 plus cases now we've helped find the roots of and reverse the disease process. And so these three primary things, I'm going to break the mold for you off the top, and I'm going to go into the symptoms of each one in order of what I find to be the most common. So the first one we see very commonly is parasites. We see parasites driving IBD Probably 80 to 90% of our clients that we see have parasites. Now, let's go back to the cup of water. Are the parasites this much or this much? I'd say 80% of the time it's this. The other 20%, they're implicated but not the prime driver. However, they typically need to come out first. The second driver we see, I'm going to put candida up here, but I'm going to put this with a caveat being fungus, because this is going to include not only candida, which is a fungus, but also mold, which is a fungus. And mold is a huge implicator in IBD. So these two are going hand in hand. And of course, the candida overgrows in these environments. The next most common one I see is a bacteria called clostridia. Now, you're going to be very common with this term. You might also know it as another term as C. diff. Now, there are many species of Clostridia. C. diff or Clostridium difficile is one of the many species. However, it's highly infectious, and we can see other Clostridia overgrowths. They're super beneficial in your gut, but overgrowths of imbalances or bad guys are a big problem. So these are the three primary drivers of IBD that we see in 300 plus. Now, again, there's many layers. I'm not saying these are the only three. I'm saying this is probably the 80 to 90% of the bulk of the 300 plus cases we've identified and helped reverse. Now, parasites, candida or mold, fungus, and clostridia. So what I want to do with you here is I'm going to break down the top symptoms. I'm going to go through the top 10 symptoms of each one, or at least the parasites and fungus. I'm going to break down what these look like and how you can identify them. Because here's what we need to know. Your body speaks a language. It's called symptomatology. And what that means, it's the study of symptoms. Now, if you have a gut issue, whatever it's going to be, anywhere from the stomach flu to IBS to bowel disease like Crohn's and colitis, your digestive system will say a lot of the same words. It's going to say things like gas, bloat, pain, constipation, diarrhea, increase or decrease appetite. It's going to say through its vocabulary, blood or mucus in the stool, cramping. These are the words it can say. There's about 15 words or so, give or take, that your gut can say. So in symptomatology, what we're doing is going beyond the limited vocabulary of your digestive system. Because if you've got IBD, you probably have one or all of those symptoms. There are very few cases who are asymptomatic, and bless you, you're lucky if you are. So we're going to talk about the symptoms not inside of your gut and how you can use these to identify your root causes, because they're very, very apparent. And it really helps us as clinicians point to the roots so we know what is filling your glass. And here's the thing, even if you're multi-layered, imagine right now, your glass is full and it's overflowing. Imagine how good you would feel if you got rid of 75% of your glass like that. Your symptoms would be reduced theoretically by up to 75%, simply by removing these three common root causes. So I'm going to show you how to identify those here. That way you can use this information to start digging into your own resources and help. And of course, you can always reach out to us should you need help. But here's some of the basics. The most obvious one we're going to talk about here, how to identify parasites by looking outside of your digestive system or outside of those typical gut symptoms. Number one, we're going to be looking at your skin. Now, there's a few things we can see and identify in skin here. So there's going to be a lot of really obvious ones. These are due to the toxins creating allergy responses or inflammation within the skin. So we can see eczema and psoriasis. We also can see an increased prominence of rashes and hives. Because of the immune pathways and the toxins being pushed and dumped through the skin, these are some really common symptoms we can see. If you want to write these down, do that now, because I'm only going to get probably 3 or 4 on here before I have to wipe the board. So I'm going through top 10 symptoms. Okay, so psoriasis and eczema are textbook classic. The first place I'm going to is hives. And it might even be just dry hands and dry feet. That might be a parasite symptom. Very, very common. Then, of course, rashes and hives. The next symptom I see, we can extend this to some joints, but we're going to say back and hip pain. Now, the reason this happens, couple of things. Number one, there is systemic inflammation. Whether you've got bloat or you've got bowel disease, you have leaky gut, which means those toxins are circulating, they can get stuck in joints. But also there are many parasite species, about 1 million worldwide, 1,400 or so that affect humans. But here's what's interesting. There are certain species, especially really nasty ones like E. histo, it's Entamoeba histolytica, or D. fragilis. There's different species. They tend to slice the gut lining and they get into your back and the back muscles around the intestines or even into the hips, and they can cause a lot of joint pain. And I will extend this out as well, just while we're on the topic of pelvic pain, PCOS or other menstrual issues or hormonal issues that have happened since you've developed bowel issues, because your organs are laying right on top of each other. And parasites also happen to love female reproductive organs especially. And so you can cause a lot of issues in there. So that's another thing we see. Another one we'll notice is your symptoms of any kind that we're talking about here, or especially your digestive systems, are cyclical. Now, what do I mean by cyclical? If you go, yeah, my flares, I flare up 1 week out of a month and then it goes away. That could be a parasite. Around the full moon, tied to your menstrual cycle, even seasonal where things get really bad and come down. This is due to the life cycle of parasites. What they do is they get in, they breed, they lay eggs, they hatch, often in line with the full moon. So it's not uncommon to see what's called a full moon protocol in parasite killers. And so in that process, we have that hatching and that excess exposure to these toxic microbes. You have an increased immune response, therefore more inflammation. So that's what inflammation is. It's an immune response. And so we can see cyclical symptoms, sometimes weekly, monthly, or seasonally, or tied to your menstrual cycle or to the full moon. These can cause issues. And so that could be a parasite problem we're looking at. Another one we're looking at is going to be if you are a teeth grinder. Pardon my, I should have been a doctor with handwriting like this. If you're a teeth grinder, because parasites can cause neurological irritation. So especially at nighttime, you find you're grinding your teeth. If you don't know if you're a teeth grinder, a quick way to do that, run your tongue over your back molars. If you have this nice peak and valley with these like high points on the outside of your molars, or if they're kind of rounded off or flattened or rounded on the edges, you'd be a teeth grinder like me. Parasite issue, that's how I identified mine. Okay, and so you can see that quite a bit. Or if you're a clencher, if you're one of those people who you press your fingernail beds or you're tensing all the time, it can be parasites because they cause neurological irritation, which causes these neurological stimulatory responses. So you can see that. Another common one that we see, and this is due to the parasite effect on the immune system, a big one is going to be sinus issues. Now it can be sinus infections, it can be chronic drippiness, runny nose, etc. That can be because the immune system is weakened and we see infection there. Also, kind of gross, but parasites can come out of anywhere. Use your imagination there, but I mean anywhere. And so sometimes they can irritate the sinus cavities as part of that. Another one, if you have had your appendix removed, I am 99% sure just off the gate you had a parasite problem or currently have a parasite issue. It's where they hang out. It's where they'll inflame. They'll block a lot of areas. Your appendix isn't just a spare organ by any means. It's actually kind of like air traffic control for your microbes, and it acts almost like an immune system for your microbiome, because your immune system's also in part worked with your microbiome. What happens when you have a gut infection, it will store bacteria and all kinds of stuff in there, so your body has this sort of memory of microbes as well. And exposures. Appendix is very important, but a parasite can hang out in there, or many parasites, which might cause inflammation. You end up with appendicitis because it's blocked, bacteria is not moving, it gets infected, and now you have it removed. And so appendix removed is a big, big cause. Another one we see, both men and women, is going to be early hair loss. Now, there's hormonal issues it contributes to, but also due to the fact that parasites love eating nutrients. Another one we'll also see is going to be early menopause. Look for the hormonal issues and hormonal imbalances, nutrient deficiencies, etc. that are caused by parasites. Two more I'm going to go through really quickly with you here, and then we're going to move on to candida, fungus, mold. The next one we're going to talk about here is going to be yeast infections. Now, there is, of course, oral thrush and oral yeast infection. There's vaginal yeast infections. There's yeast infections in the gut when candida can overgrow, which will tie into one of our other issues. But parasites can lead to this microbial imbalance and inflammation, which contributes to overgrowth. So if you're someone, very simple, you got white film on your tongue, we'll talk about that in the next one here about mold and fungus, but that can be a big one if you got yeast infections, white spots, oral thrush, genital yeast infections as well. If you're prone to these things, it could be a parasite issue driving that problem. And the last one, which is very important also, is SIBO. Two main drivers of SIBO, if you think about your intestines, let's just look at the small intestine, because that's what this is, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So your small intestine terminates with the terminal ileum. That's where it joins to the large bowel. And then you have your stomach. Now, there's a valve here and a valve here. SIBO is when bacteria overgrows. Now, is that because one of two reasons? One, there's something introduced, so there's overgrowth due to antibiotics, or two, your valves aren't opening and closing properly. You're getting bacteria entering where it shouldn't, or a backflow of fecal microbes from your large intestine into the small bowel. Now we have an overgrowth. How many of you or your friends or colleagues or you listening right now or watching have had issues with the terminal ileum? We see this all the time. Even in colitis, not yet diagnosed Crohn's, or in Crohn's, the terminal ileum is often implicated because 80+% of the time I see parasites, and they also hang around there, causing issues in the valves, which can lead to SIBO or terminal ileum or this ileitis. And so we see this quite a bit. And so these are the primary drivers of parasites. Now, we're going to get to what to do about some of these here. However, I want to open the floor for questions as we're going on. Please do drop them in the comments right now as we're going through. This is very important stuff. And now, while you're doing that, I'm going to get on to candida. This is another common driver. Candida, we often find, it doesn't overgrow on its own. It has things that create it, that cause it to overgrow. Candida is native to your microbiome. It's like clostridia, very beneficial, native to your microbiome. It's part and parcel. And so what causes it to overgrow? This is what leads to the candida problem. So we need to bring that down by also addressing what caused it to overgrow. But typically we'll see, yes, parasites can cause that, stress can cause that. Diet is a big one. Sugars, refined foods, corn syrups like pop. This will drive candida up, stress, and antibiotics. So let's talk about candida. Now, for those of you watching on the zoomed out camera there on Instagram, you're probably getting a little bit of my treasure trail down here. If you're on the Facebook, you're spared. I broke the last button off my shirt, and so I'm wearing it anyway, and so you're getting a little flash of some belly hair. But let's talk about candida. Candida is what's called an opportunistic microbe. And so when it's inside of your gut, it has an opportunity to, it will overgrow. So those opportunities are high stress dietary environments, or of course, antibiotic use. Long-term antibiotics or multiple recurrent antibiotics kill off the good healthy microbes you want controlling and policing these opportunistic fungus, and they overgrow. Now I'm going to put a slash up here, fungus, because we're going to talk a little bit about mold as well. It's a fungus. But antibiotics will drive that immune system or defenses down, allowing candida to overgrow. And I did mention a white film. Now, a white film on the tongue, or again, any kind of yeast infection, oral, genital, or white film on the tongue can show candida. And this is a big one that we can look at because candida, they're byproducts. There's like something like a dozen or 15 different byproducts candida produces, but they can culture. Their spores or the toxins they produce can create this filminess, this white film on the tongue. And so we can identify that as well as a driver of candida. This is why we actually look at people's tongues. When someone comes into my program, I actually have them take photos of their tongue as part of it so I can read it, the shape, the size, if you got bumps on the side, cracks in the middle, if it's pale, if it's greasy, if it's dark in color, the veins underneath, what color they are, the color film on top of your tongue, beige and white or black, they all tell us something. So we have to look at the tongue. So white film, antibiotics, or any kind of yeast issue in the body can create these problems. Another one we see is forgetfulness. If you're forgetful, kind of lightheaded, airy, feeling kind of dopey or stupid, it might be a candida problem. It produces all kinds of toxins like acetaldehyde, and this one can drive neurological issues or inflammation. It can mess with your neurotransmitter production, meaning your brain's not going to operate the same way. You get forgetful, you get lightheaded, you start to think like you walk into a room and forget why you were there. You have trouble recalling names and spaces. These are neurotransmitter issues. And some of the toxins produced by fungus like mold or candida, or what mold will do to create neurological irritation, can create forgetfulness as well. So keep that in mind. Here's another interesting one. This often points to mold. If you're somebody who finds yourself getting an unusual amount of electric shocks, carpets, doorknobs, cars, not in the wintertime, it's dry, but these things can indicate mold because of the neurological irritation. And one of the theories is the electrical charge that they produce. Your body literally, you're made of electricity and cells and water, and that electric charge actually builds up and you can shock yourself. So if you go like, I get shocked almost every day, you might have a mold problem, which is a fungus. We have to look at that. Forgetfulness, we did talk about this one as part of that one. I jumped ahead of myself, but balance issues as well. If you're having trouble with balance, it can be the toxins, it can be inflammation of the nerves and things in the inner ear. It can also be neurotransmitters and the way it irritates all of that. So balance issues are common with fungal overgrowth or mold. Another one that we see, we talked about that history of antibiotics. It's on my list. I jumped ahead, so beautiful. Let's talk about itching or burning. I used to get this a lot when I didn't know I had candida at the time. I was too young. That says, that says bumming. I'm going to put burning. There we go. Itching or burning. Now, is that itching or burning? It can be the eyes and the genitals are the most common areas because the toxins that they produce, it can like localize and collect in certain areas like drainage pathways. Things that drain, we talked about drainage in other episodes. It's going to be your sinuses, your lymphatics, your bowels, your skin, of course, can drain. And in fact, I'm going to even put as a sidebar here, acne, another common cause I see with candida, especially on the back and neck, chest and arms. So we do see that a fair bit. But itching or burning, if you're getting this, it's a localized toxin draining from the eyes or the genitals and you're irritating the tissue. And so if you find you're scratching your eyes a lot or they're watering and that sensation, it could be a candida issue and it could be coming out through some of these glands. Another one we're looking at, and you might see some of these overlap, I tried not to, but seeking behaviors. The reason we seek candida, fungus, mold, and which we'll talk about clostridia coming up, mess with a lot of these dopamine pathways and serotonin pathways. And that's one thing we can see. So seeking drugs, sex, alcohol, but alcohol, sugars, carbohydrates, and foods, they are prime food for candida. Your candida actually sends a signal back to your brain that says, feed me these things. I want them. I crave them. They're superfood. They help them grow and spread, and they start to kind of go from single cell to what we call a hyphal form, where it creates a web and it penetrates and embeds into your intestinal wall. That's what candida does. And so they can cause you to seek out or crave carbs, starches, sugars, alcohols, things that's superfood for them. And they'll send signals to your brain saying, feed me. Now, we did briefly talk about neurological issues in the way of balance, and we kind of touched on inner ear. So dizziness, ear ringing, brain fog, sensitivity to lights and sounds. These are just a few of dozens of mold symptoms. Asthma and inflammation in the lungs. These can be signs of mold because mold fungus, there's many different kinds of mold fungus, 36 common identified by the EPA, but mold fungus will actually create neurological irritation and lead to all kinds of issues like we talked about, ringing in the air, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, dizziness, all those types of things. So we have to really watch for some of that. And if you have a known mold issue in your home, you'll want to check on that. Another one we see with candida, I'm going to put here trouble. I'm just going to put trouble getting with an arrow, trouble getting up out of bed. If you struggle to get out of bed in the morning, you could be groggy, but primarily you're kind of stiff, you're achy, you're sore. It takes a while to get moving. Candida is a living organism. It produces a lot of toxins. Now, I know I'm focusing on candida, but I really want you to understand mold as well. But they produce all these toxins. Mold produces mycotoxins. Candida produces byproducts with several toxins, and they get into your system. Your heart doesn't stop pumping overnight. You have blood circulating all over, and these toxins can move around and settle into bones and joints and muscles, and it takes a bit to get up and get moving and get those drainage pathways to move that stuff around so it's not so localized. That can be a candida issue. And the last one I'm going to put here, I'm just going to write it on the right side of the board. I'm going to put MCAS, MCAS, that's mast cell activation syndrome. Now we see histamines as well in parasites, but commonly in mold and fungus, where if you eat foods higher in histamine, this is going to be foods like spinach, avocados, or foods that are prone to mold like certain coffees or most manufactured coffee on a mega scale, peanut butters, these certain foods, fried foods, fermented foods, canned foods. These are all high in histamines. Dairy products like cheeses and yogurt. These can drive up histamine responses. So you might find yourself getting rashes or hives. You might find yourself getting really phlegmy. If you're finding a lot of phlegm buildup, maybe you're finding you're irritable or moody. In fact, there was a boy we worked with, 15 years old at the time, a year or 2 years ago now, and every time he would eat he loved canned tuna, great snack, very easy. Every time he would eat it, he'd get really irritable and a bit bloated. It wasn't the fish, it was the histamines, and he had a histamine response. If you heard us talk about Larissa, she was a video we just put on YouTube. 16 years or something. She was diagnosed rather in 2013, severe colitis. We actually have her colonoscopy reports before and after. Before, total mess, 16 weeks, near perfect. And what happened in between was we identified things that were driving her problems. She had parasites, but they also had a histamine issue. So bone broth, very high in histamine. You're told drink bone broth for your gut, but it was bad for her gut because of the histamines. If you find bone broth causes you a problem, it could be a histamine issue, or it could be what we're talking about next. Dum-dum-dum, cliffhanger. So here's what we're getting into. We talked about parasites, identifying the 10 most common symptoms. Now again, I've got a list of 50 plus parasite symptoms. I just pulled out the 10 most common. Same with candida, there are dozens, and it's our job to connect the dots. Let's look at the next one. Clostridia. Now I mentioned earlier, you might know Clostridia by another word, C. diff. That's Clostridium difficile. It's one of the many strains or species of Clostridia. However, take a look at this one. I got a little list down here I'm going to bring right up. Boop, there it is. So take a look at this one. Clostridia, when it overgrows in its subspecies, we can identify this through things like an organic acid test. There's lots of things we can identify as markers for this. But Clostridia, it's a very toxic microbe in overgrowth amounts, and it produces a lot of spores, typically in 3-day life cycles. And these spores create inflammation, and the inflammation your body reacts to. Now, if you're someone who drinks, say, bone broth, for example, so something with collagen, it can actually burst. So I'm going to put collagen up here. If you have sensitivities to collagen or bone broth, what it can do is actually burst these Clostridia spores. It's kind of like bursting a balloon full of confetti. And now whoosh, goes everywhere, lands all over the intestines, and your immune system has to come in and clean up. And that cleanup creates inflammation. That inflammation you react to, and now you bleed or have diarrhea. So we see a fair bit of that. It also interferes with protein digestion. So we have to watch for that. Another one, high fat. If high fat causes diarrhea, there's a few reasons. Again, it can have to do with the Clostridia interaction. Sometimes it has to do with a gallbladder issue, which can point back to things like parasites, candida, and you're not emulsifying fats. But another one we can look at is high fat and Clostridia. This is because it interferes with the digestion. It can ferment some of the fats, creating more toxins, creating more issues. It might cause you to bleed. And so collagen, I'm going to put up here, I should have put up here as well, is calcium. If calcium, for the same reason, it can cause bleeding. If you have calcium supplements or something high in calcium, watch that. Now, Clostridia, because of the way the microbes work, they interfere with a lot of your neurotransmitters in that conversion. And so you have a lot of neurological issues. So a lot of these are going to be neurological. So hallucinations. It's a rarer thing to happen. It takes a lot of overgrowth, but we can see this. Even if it's almost like waking in day, like almost like a daydream, but you're not dozing off, you're kind of looking, you think you heard somebody, or you think you saw something. It could be messing with your neurochemistry, and it can be the neurotransmitters and the pathways inflamed or altered based on your microbes. That's something to consider. Another one we'll see, other neurological, is going to be tics or Tourette's. You can see this as well. And this can be a Clostridia issue, again, neurological inflammation. And same with the next three I'm going to list here. So OCD, seizures, and ADD or ADHD type symptoms can all be messing with the neurochemistry, neuroinflammation. The last one that I'll just put right in the middle here is going to be depression. Now this can come with damn near anything. It just has to do with the imbalance of serotonin and dopamine, which 90% is made in your gut. So if you're having issues not focusing, this might be where it's coming from. So here's what I want to talk about with you really quick. If you haven't put your questions in the chat yet, please do that. And I want to get into what to do about it. Before we do, here's what I want you to know. If you want to identify the roots, right now your doctor said it's autoimmune, it's genetic, there's no cause. We see these causes all the time. If you want to start to identify what's filling your glass, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you want to get in touch with me and my team, check the links below, the show notes in the podcast or below the video, and there's links in there to get in touch. It's the best way to do this. And we're going to get in touch. I'll reach out, talk to you about the gut health solution, what we can do in 16 weeks with you to start reversing this process. And we can show you some videos and people who have done it, and a lot of content around it, how it works. I just want to get you information. And if you want to jump on a call after that and say this sounds like a good plan, let me know. But just to start the process of learning more and getting you resources. So let's talk about how to get rid of these. Now, what we have to do of course, we have a problem. We have to get rid of it. We talked about this in last week, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. I will get a bit specific. We talked about drainage. And if you need last week, go back to the last one. And then we talk about the 5 R's. These are pretty straightforward. So this is going to be remove the problem, replenish nutrients, repair and rebuild the microbiome and gut tissue, and rejuvenate the immune system. I've talked about it before, so I'm not going to get into detail. However, there are some things that can help us remove these problems when your body's been prepared. So please don't go right into killing microbes or killing stuff off. You can get very sick. This should be done under supervision, but I want you to be equipped with some of the tools for consideration, especially if you're working with someone else. It just adds more to your tool chest, and it's going to give you the ability to understand, like, is what they're doing working for me? Do I see the end line here? Are they just managing my symptoms with supplements, so it's just plant-based medication, or am I getting to the root of my problem? And so I want you to have that in your pocket. So we'll talk about this. Yes, drainage. Yes, 5 R's. How do we remove it? So there is prep work to do. It has to be drainage. We have to, detoxing is collecting your trash. Drainage is bringing it out to the curb. And so if you want to get rid of these guys, you got to do drainage. So this is going to be liver, lymphatics, etc. So we can look at things like acupuncture. I never know how many C's to put in acupuncture. I think it's 1. Anyway, so things like acupuncture, sweating. We can, of course, use red light. One of the most common supplements I use is called TUDCA. This is an acid that actually helps open up the bile ducts and thin out bile, allows things to flush out as well. These are some really basics for drainage support. There are drainage supplements we can utilize, liver support, things like NAC can be very helpful. But sweating, movement, activity, binding, and toxicity can help. We can also use some universal binders. Now, these are going to help with pretty much all the things, especially this is for your liver. Everything we talked about, 3 causes, parasites, candida, fungus, mold, and your clostridia, all of these can be benefited from TUDCA, NAC, and basic binders. I just encourage you to go slow, because if you're not working with supervision, you can actually cause a really bad reaction and hospitalize yourself. So this is not medical advice. You just take it as information, education, or entertainment, okay? So we have to get rid of the things. Now, here's the good news. When it comes down to things like parasites and fungus like candida, let's put these on the board here for you. So parasites and candida. These guys often are killed off by a lot of the same things. So there's some great products out there like biocidin products or cell core products, which we utilize quite a lot in our protocols. Parasites, they often respond really well. This isn't a perfect fix, right, guys? Remember, this is surface. I can't give you everything yet because it would just take weeks to do. But Mimosa pudica can kind of scrape and grab parasites, but we need killers. The good news is a lot of things that happen to kill parasites also happen to kill candida. So these are your basic antifungals, your oreganos, your thyme, clove, black walnut, grapeseed oils. We see lemon balm, calendula arnica can help with the inflammation in all cases. There's all kinds of natural things that can really help get rid of these guys in a way. Parasites can be sticky though, and candida. So here's what you need to know. For parasites, most adults, you're probably 4 to 6 months. And with candida, depending on the severity of what you've got going on, you can't just take an antifungal, fluconazole or nystatin or something for 10 days like your doctor gives you. Candida is long haul. And here's what we got. Some people, I would say 12 to probably 18 months, depending on the severity for candida, especially if you're older than, say, 25, 30. So we really want to understand this takes time. We're not magicians. Your body, we can't clean things overnight. It takes time to change your gut microbes, to grow new flora. It's like planting a garden. You're not going to have carrots tomorrow. It's going to take time for them to get in and to grow and to harvest. The same with your gut. So you have to be prepared. But there's layers to this process, right? Typically, we want to bind and we want to drain. So the toxins they're producing, we want to capture them and then get them out of the body. But then, depending on the layer you're at, sometimes you go right to killing them off. Sometimes we have to go into biofilms. But if you watched from last week or 2 weeks ago, we had Billie Jean on and she's in her process. We went after biofilms and she flared. We expected it, but it can happen. So we have to be careful. And clostridia can work around a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same killers. And so there is a process, there's a method to the madness. We have to go through drainage. We have to go through binding. Sometimes it's biofilm, sometimes it's killing. But I don't want you to think of it like a linear process because your body is so different. Everyone's unique. We never go chop, 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 top to bottom. Oftentimes what we do instead is more like a Jenga tower. We go piece by piece until it comfortably starts to come down without falling. And that's how we get people better. What we don't want to do is these very complex or these very oversimplified processes of complex things, because that's how we get very, very sick. Now, if you're here listening and this is making sense to you and you want a process to get your root causes out, and want to figure out what's filling your glass, easiest way to do that, if you're on YouTube or listening on the podcast, check the links below in the notes, and you're going to get you some links in here on how to get in touch with me and my team. There's a link to book a call, and you can even email questions directly. All that's available to you there. We just want to make sure these resources that you have them, and we can just point you in a new direction or work with us. Doesn't matter. We just want to make sure you have the help. That's why this information's out there. One of my favorite things to hear as an IBD specialist is something along the lines of, I learned more from you in 15 minutes than from my doctor in 15 years. And if this for the first time is really starting to click and it's starting to make sense, and you're going, wait a minute, this might be reversible. I think there's more that I can do. This condition came out of nowhere. It happened to me out of the blue. I was healthy for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and suddenly I wasn't, and you're telling me there's no cause. If you're understanding finally that there is a cause, that something is driving this, I want to invite you to check the link in the show notes below. Send me an email, ask a question, see if a program is a right fit for you, because I promise you, this doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence. You're not doomed to this, and IBD can be reversed.